you all to Freyr's UDI Vision webinar series. Today's session, which is the third and the final part of the series, will be focusing on DI and PI, which is device identifiers and production identifiers. And the agenda will cover a synopsis of Freyr's corporate overview and UDI capabilities, understanding UDI and packaging, UDI device types, PT code and PMA, 21 CFR Part 11 requirements for UDI, next steps, benefits, and exceptions, and of course, we'll wrap it up with the Q&A. We plan to cover the session in around 45 minutes, which will be followed by a Q&A session. We will be muting the telephone lines during the session, so if you do have any questions at any point in time, please submit them to the staff using the question panels on your screens. We'll be collecting all the questions and respond to as many as we can. A copy of all the webinar audios and slides for all the three sessions of the series will be made available to all delegates. I'll just take a few moments now to quickly introduce our presenters. So we have today with us Prasanna. Prasanna heads Freyr's UDI practice and Center of Excellence and brings over 16+ years of experience in managing critical large-scale global engagements, both in the ITES and UDI domains, with an expert-level proficiency over information security management systems, quality management systems, as well as ISO, IEC standards related to FDA's UDI ruling. Prasanna has a global experience in consulting and developing UDI frameworks and system architecture within an internationally acclaimed standards organization, supporting their goal for becoming the 4th UDI DI issuing agency. We also have with us today Anant Mahendran, who is the client partner for the UDI domain. And I will now pass it on to Anant for taking us through the corporate overview for Freyr. So Anant, over to you.
Thank you, Ranvijay. Hello, everybody. And as Ranvijay mentioned, I'm Anant Mahendran. I'm one of the client partners with Freyr Solutions. So I would like to give you a very high-level understanding of Freyr as a company on the whole. So we are a fast-growing end-to-end global regulatory services and solutions company, and we offer our services to licenses companies. We are headquartered in New Jersey, USA, and we have offices in UK, and we have our largest operations and regulatory operations and development center in Hyderabad. So we have grown at a very fast pace in the recent past, and we are already inching towards the 400 mark. We're already 350 plus. Within which more than 80% of our employees are regulatory, scientific, technology, and consulting professionals, which we consider as one of our strengths. And we are ISO 9001 information security certified and 27000. ISO 9001 quality certified and 27001 information security certified organization. And we are exclusive strategic partners with some of the largest pharmaceutical, consumer healthcare, and medical device companies, offering services within multiple domains within the regulatory space. And within the UDI space, we offer services in a simple three-step process, and each of these steps could be offered as a standalone service or as a sequential service as well. So to begin with, we offer UDI readiness assessment and gap analysis, wherein we would be giving an understanding of what the UDI ruling is and what exactly it entails and different steps that need to be taken in order to help companies comply with the UDI mandate. So here we do gap analysis of the different data attributes and also the technology landscape and give a recommendation on the next steps. So following this, we offer DI implementation, submissions management, and lifecycle management. So these two verticals of service are offered in 3 different flavors. So we have our own homegrown standalone software that we have built for UDI compliance, which is a HL7 SPL2 called the Freyr Identity, which can manage the DI, PI, and lifecycle management of both these data. And apart from this, we offer technology custom bolt-on solution called the Freyr Accelerate, wherein we would do customized enterprise scale application solution, wherein we would do a gap analysis of the technology infrastructure, and we can build connectors to different ERP systems, PLMs, and feed the data into our player identity tool, convert it into XMLs, and submit it to the good ID. So apart from this, last but not least, we also offer operational data management service, so wherein we completely take ownership of your data. Once the DI data is submitted to us, we concise, we format, and we convert it into XML files and submit it to the good ID. So this at a very high level is what FRAYER offers within the regulatory space and also the UDI space. So having said that, I would like to pass it on to Prasanna right now, who will take you through the core of our conversation today. Thank you.
Hello everybody.
Over to you, Prasanna.
And welcome back. Yeah, thanks Anand. And hello everybody and welcome back. So in this part we will be understanding more about UDI and packaging. So we'll start off with the device identifier or DI and what are its components. In our previous conversations, we talked about it briefly about all the different attributes and the 62 different fields which are to be submitted to the GUIDID. So here let's talk a little more specific about each of these different categories which are categorized for the submission. So as we all know that DI or device identifier, it's a mandatory or fixed portion of the UDI that has certain device attribute data which has to be submitted to GUIDID. The device attribute data is classified in the following sections, as you can see there. So first is the labeler, device status and characteristics in pre-market submission. This is the first category. In this, we have the DUNS number as one of the parameters, and based on the DUNS number, the FDA system or the GUIDID database will automatically extract the labeler's organization information like address and other information. So here the GUIDID is tied closely with the DUNS database as well. And as we all know that DUNS is a 9-character numeric value. So if a labeler wants to hire a third party, so the third party UDI submitter or third party labeler needs to also have their DUNS number. And this third party DUNS number needs to be associated with the labeler's DUNS number at the time of GUIDID account activation. So when we submit the GUIDID account request, so we need to also provide the third party labeler's DUNS number. In this way, the third party gets the authority to submit the GUIDID data for that particular labeler. Then the next category here is the specific version or model number, product codes. So these attributes will ascertain the change in the version or the model number, which could trigger a new UDI. There are also some other criteria based on which the new UDI might be triggered. A labeler can have multiple FDA listing numbers, PMAs, and their supplement numbers as well. So all this entire information for a particular device needs to be submitted to the GUIDID. Then next parameter or the attribute in this particular section is the GMDN or FDA PT code. So these are the two codes, both of which are not required to be submitted. Only one needs to be submitted to the GUIDID database. Then we have the package configuration. There are different levels of packaging which might be there for a particular device, or there might be a single packaging for a device. So we'll talk about this packaging configuration in subsequent discussion here. Then we have the storage conditions like temperature, humidity, and pressure. Then the next category is the clinically relevant size, which talks about the weight, height, depth, angle, and so on. Then the next category is sterilization method, which talks about if the package or the device packaging is sterile or the device needs to be sterilized before use, and subsequent methods of sterilization that is required for sterilizing that particular medical device. Then the last two categories are MRI status and latex information, which talks about the MRI applicability for that particular device. And the last one is the latex information, which talks about whether that particular device is having the latex or it is safe to be used. So that kind of information needs to be submitted to GoodIT. Now, in the next slide, we are looking at the different types of DI that might come into those are being used in terms of UDI. So if we take one example of a device, so we might have a primary DI, then we might have a secondary DI, and then we might have a package DI. So if we take an example of a Band-Aid pack, which comes in a box which contains 10 Band-Aid strips. Now, as we all know that in this particular example, individual Band-Aid strip cannot be purchased. So the minimum packaging configuration there is a box of 10. So now that becomes the primary DI or the primary device identifier. And in this case, the individual Band-Aid strip becomes the unit of use DI. Now, as we talked that this particular package comes in a pack of 10, there can be different configurations, which we will discuss. We will take some examples in the subsequent slide and we'll understand more on that. Now, there is also a terminology called secondary DI. Now, the secondary DI is any other alternate identifier that might be already in existence to identify that particular device. And probably this particular so this secondary DI might be issued from some different FDA accredited issuing agencies. Okay, so in this next slide, as I was mentioning earlier, we are looking at one of the packaging configurations here. So in this example, we see that the primary DI is different from the unit of use DI. So as I was mentioning earlier, this is the same example of the Band-Aid. So there is a base pack and then there is a unit of use. So the unit of use DI is 1001 and the primary package or the base package DI is 2001. So the primary DI here is 2001. This can be packaged into multiple configurations, which might be 3001, which could contain a box of 10 2001s, in which those 2001 would contain 1001. So this is how the packaging configuration as far as UDI is concerned works, and all this information needs to be submitted to the GoodIT database. Now let's consider another example here with regards to the package configuration. Here the primary DI and the unit of use DI are both same. So here we are looking at an example of an electronic thermometer, wherein the thermometer is also available to be purchased individually. We need not purchase a box of thermometers, right? So the unit of use and the primary DI are both same. So as you can see that there is 1001 and then same thing is packaged into 2001, which might be a box of 30 thermometers packaged, and subsequently we can have 4001, which can be a box of 50 units of base package DI 1001. Now moving on, so here we see different DI record states. Here we are seeing the different states of the DI which it undergoes. So initially we have the draft DI which comes into play, wherein the DI information is submitted through the web interface. It goes into the draft mode. Then from the draft mode, it can either be directly going into the published mode, or it can stay in an unpublished mode, provided the published date is greater than the current date. So once a draft DI goes into a published mode, it remains in unpublished mode until the published date is equivalent to the current date. Now, once the this one published date crosses the current system date, that is the current coded database date, it automatically gets transferred into the published state. So here there are certain time restrictions as far as how long the DI can stay in each of these states. Now, if we have entered a particular DI in a draft mode and we are still in the drafting mode, we have not published it, so it can stay there for 6 calendar months or 180 days as per the Gooded ruling, after which that data gets cleared. Now, as far as unpublished mode is concerned, there is no specific time limit. No specific time limit is mentioned there. The only criteria is we should have a relevant published date, which can trigger the coded database to publish this particular DI into published mode. Earlier, now coming to the published mode, earlier once the device is published, the Gooded ruling said that only you have a time period of 7 days to alter this data. If there is any mistake in this published information, there was only 7 days. Now this grace period is extended to 30 days. So once the 30 days time period or the time frame crosses, then there is no way you can alter the device data directly. If you find any differences there, then you need to contact the FDA help desk and then take their guidance as to how it can be changed. And we also need to provide the justification for the change. And there might be a scenario wherein the FDA might ask you to create a new DI for that, or they may allow you to edit that particular data. So it's you need to approach the FDA help desk once you cross the 30-day time period. Now moving on, so here we see the production identifiers. So as we all know that the production identifiers are conditional and variable portion of UDI, and out of these 5 parameters or attributes, one or many can be submitted. So now, what is the significance of all these parameters, what we are submitting as a part of the PI? The basic advantage or need with which the UDI ruling was formulated was to enhance the traceability of the devices in the adverse event or product quality complaint reporting, or popularly known as post-market surveillance activities. It also advises the health workers to incorporate the UDI in the electronic health records of the patients. So incorporating any of these serial number, lot number or batch number or DIN number, so these 3 parameters identify an instance specific device. They are specific to a device, and a particular device can be uniquely identified in any supply chain, or even if it reaches the customer, it can be identified. So the AIDC technologies also use the UDI as a key to locate the device information from respective database. So the AIDC technologies normally, are the RFID and the barcode technologies, which we have discussed in our previous webinars. So those systems might be used in the entire supply chain, or within a particular hospital premises, or within a particular warehouse of the medical device. So to identify, or if there is a recall which is happening and that particular lot number or batch number devices are still within the warehouse, they can be tracked easily using these AIDC techniques, and they can be stopped from entering the supply chain. RFID plays a very, very important role and a good role in identifying and tracking these devices within the supply chain, and more efficiently as indicated in our previous discussions. So moving on to next slide, here we see different UDI device types which are mandated as per the UDI ruling. I hope the screen has refreshed by now. I guess there's some delay in refreshing. So here, as per the UDI ruling, there are two variations of medical devices. The first is the configurable device, and the second is a kit. The UDI ruling classifies these two types of devices. Now first, let's consider the configurable device. A configurable device is a system which has multiple components consisting of both. It can consist of both medical and non-medical devices, which could work collectively to deliver a particular result. These devices can be operated in multiple modes or settings or alterations. Or popularly, typically this is called as different configuration in which a particular device can be operated. The only condition here is the labeler needs to have specified all these configurations or combinations in the catalog of that particular device. And if any new combination arises which is not mentioned in the catalog, might trigger a new DI. Now, the popular examples for this might be CT system, wherein we have a combination of gantry tube, table, console, and different items there, which can be combined and configured. Similarly, we have the anesthesia system, wherein the ventilator, breathing circuit, and vaporizer items are all configured and then used. Now, talking about kits, it is also similar to the configurable device, but not all components specified need to be used. They are more like a convenience kit, or to take an example, it's like an orthopedic tray. That might be a good example here, wherein we have medical device and also its relevant instruments that are packaged together. The instruments may be again maybe a multi-use devices and may command a different UDI applicability like direct marking requirements. So we'll see the examples in next slides here. So if you look at this particular example, this is a spinal cord implant which is consisting of multiple items here. So in this particular example, we have taken 4 components or 4 different part numbers which are being used to deliver a particular result. So the manufacturer might have sent all these screws and the shaft and the connectors, and these may be configured or customized from for a particular patient's need. For example, the part number 4, that is the straight rod, that might need to be reduced in length to meet the particular end user. So here, if some patient needs to use this particular implant, there might be a requirement of using the entire system or the entire system in whole. So there might not be any exclusion in any parts here. So if we look at another example here, which is a kit. So the previous example of the spinal cord implant can also become a kit if the manufacturer is supplying the additional screws and the shafts and the connectors. That time it can become a kit as well. So here let's look at a very specific example for a kit. This is an example of a stereotactic system wherein it combines, it is having multiple instruments there. One of the examples which we were working on had about 99 different part numbers of the stereotactic system. Here we have just, as an example, we have noted only the 9 of the components here. So here the instrument is on the medical device is only one, which is the arc and the needle insertions. So now this needs to have the assistance of different devices like drills and bits and supporting screws there. So which might be used multiple times as per the need and the situation there. So this can be an example of a kit. Moving on. So here we'll discuss about the different codes used for the coded submission. So there are 3 different codes which are prescribed under UDI under UDI ruling. The first one is called the FDA product code, which is a controlled vocabulary maintained by FDA. These codes are 3-character alphabets describing the device in a generic way. So these codes do not specify a specific device as such. They are generic in a generic way. So this can be found in FDA's approval letter for that particular device. So this is a 3-character letter which are all alphabets and can be found on the this one, approval or the clearance letter issued by FDA. Now coming to the GMDN code. This GMDN code is maintained by the Global Medical Device Nomenclature Agency, or which is popularly known as GMDN. So this GMDN is a global agency which defines these codes, and these codes describe a device more specifically in line with their functionality or a specific function. So again, these codes are not instance specific for a particular device manufacturer. They might generally or more specifically for as far as functionality is concerned, these codes classify those devices. The lookup for this code is charged or probably a subscription based one. If a particular device does not have a matching GMDN code in the database, GMDN database, the particular device manufacturer or labeler can put a request to GMDN agency for creating a new code. And the GMDN would on particular merits accept that request and create a new code for that particular device. If at all there is no matching code which is available in their database. The entire process is again time consuming and needs to be planned accordingly by the labeler. This GMDN code is accepted globally for device characteristics. It is a 5-character numeric parameter. Now coming to FDA PT code, FDA has also come up with a similar controlled vocabulary, and it is known as FDA preferred term. This code also serves a similar purpose as GMDN code. So GMDN code, and this is a 4-character alphabets. And FDA came up with this approach to reduce the cost of UDI submission, because there is the entire UDI implementation also comes with a added cost to the labelers in terms of the technology implementation and then submissions. So globally there is a cost involved in the entire UDI compliance. Now the GUID database does not require you to submit both GMDN and FDA PT code. Only one of them is necessary. And along with them, the FDA product code also needs to be submitted. Now let's look at example of FDA PT code and a GMDN code. I hope the screen has refreshed. So if you look at this example here we are looking at a hyperthermia system. So the FDA PT code is HXKT, which is 4-character alphabet, and then similar GMDN code is 40783. Now there is a slight difference in both these equipments here. So people who are into this hyperthermia system might be able to identify it very quickly here. So the main difference here is the HXKT refers to a hyperthermia system which works on microwave, and the hyperthermia system which is shown here with GMDN code, that is 40783, works on radio frequency. So there is also a FDA PT code for radio frequency hyperthermia system, that is HXKQ. So let's move on. So here we are talking about the different types of pre-market submissions. As you are all aware that there are multiple pre-market submission types. The PMAs are given by two centers by FDA, which are CDRH, that is Center for Device and Radiological Health, or CBER, Center for Biological Evaluation and Research. The prefix of the pre-market submission, the prefix of the pre-market submission helps us to identify from which center this authorization was acquired. If the prefix is of 2 characters, then it is issued by CBER, that is Center for Biological Evaluation and Research. And if the prefix is of 1 character, then it is from CDRH, that is Center for Device and Radiological Health. Each of the submissions may have you may have acquired multiple submission types, like you might have a 510K along with PMA, or there might be different combinations based on the device types. And there might also be multiple supplements to each of these submissions. Now the GOODED accepts that you submit all this relevant information during the submission. So there is a provision of entering multiple submission types and multiple supplements as well. And the business rule for the GOODED acceptance for each of these pre-market submissions and their supplements is shown in the chart here. Now moving on. So let's talk about the Part 11 requirements which relates to the UDI ruling. So here let's read the statement which is extracted from the ruling here first. So the ruling states that there are 2 requirements necessary for Part 11 applicability. The records that are required to be maintained or submitted to FDA, and the second one, records that are kept in electronic format as opposed to paper. Now let's understand these 2 statements a little bit closely. The first point states that any record submitted to FDA needs to be Part 11 compliant, whether the submission has taken via electronic media or paper format. Now the second point talks specifically about electronic records that are submitted to FDA. Here there are 2 situations we can think about, right? The first situation is that electronic means was used to generate that particular record which is getting submitted to FDA. But that electronic means is not being used in practice for day-to-day activity. So here what the Part 11 requirement says is, in this scenario, the electronic record need not be Part 11 compliant, because you are not using them for all the practical purposes. Only the paper-based document need to be compliant with Part 11. Now, if you look at the second scenario, the electronic means is used to generate the record, and the same electronic means is used to submit to the FDA as well. Now, this record may also be used for the day-to-day operations. Now, in this case, the Part 11 requirement states that the electronic record need to be Part 11 compliant. So, whatever the labeler decides to do, this particular decision needs to be documented somewhere in the SOP or in some place which, when asked by FDA, needs to be submitted. Now let's look at the second point what is mentioned here. The records that are submitted to GOODED should comply with Part 11 requirements, but the record developed to collect the data elements required to be entered into the device record by a GOODED web user interface is not subject to Part 11 requirements. Now what this means here is, we might be employing various means or various techniques to collate the data which are required for GOODED submission. Now all the 62 parameters which are required for UDI or GOODED submission might be scattered throughout our production or QA environment there. So when we might be using a particular tool like Freer Identity or any other tool to collate the data and process them, but the submission is happening through the GoodID's web interface. So the tool which is assisting you to collect the data need not be Part 11 compliant, is what this particular compliance needs states. So next point is the HL7 SPL solution must be compliant with requirements of Part 11. So there might be certain tools which might be which are out there which will assist you to directly enter the data and generate the XML out of it and submit it, like the one which Freer has, that's the identity. So those kind of solutions which are directly implemented by the labeler needs to also be Part 11 compliant. Moving to the next point, the GoodID SPL submission does not require a signature. Therefore, Part 11 requirement specific to electronic signatures does not apply. Now, the web interface, if any of you have seen the web interface of GoodID provided by FDA, so there is no requirement of any signature. There is just the username and password which acts as the signatures and the authorization. So once you log into the system, so you can directly go ahead and submit the data. So in such a scenario, the Part 11 requirements does not apply. Now coming to the next point, which talks about the digital certificates to authenticate a sender. So if somebody is using the web interface, again there is no digital certificate required. It's only the FDA's ESG gateway. The labelers who are using the FDA's ESG gateway, they need to have a digital certificate. That is the HL7 SPL submission route. So there, for every submission, the digital certificate gets uploaded to identify the specific user who has uploaded that particular submission. Coming to the second last point, the third-party submitters or solution providers are not responsible to FDA to meet the regulatory requirements for UDI or Part 11. Now, what it means is here is a labeler might employ a third-party submitter to assist them in collating and submitting the data. So the third party here is not generating any data or not responsible for accuracy of the data, since he is just acting on behalf of the labeler. So these third party submitters are not bound by the Part 11 or UDI compliance rules. The last point basically summarizes the second last bullet. So it says that it's the legal responsibility of the labeler or the data owner, more specifically data owner, because in some cases the manufacturer is different from the labeler, to meet the record requirements for 21 CFR 830.360 and the requirements detailed in 21 CFR Part 11. So moving on to the next slide here. So in earlier presentations, we talked about the life cycle management. So the life cycle management, there are various scenarios here, and a lot of responsibility lies with the labeler. So there are a few challenges which we have mentioned here. The UDI, as per the UDI ruling, the production identifier details need to be maintained by the labeler. So it is not going to enter the GoodID database. So what are the typical challenges faced by a labeler here in terms of complying with the UDI ruling? First is the submission management. Here, when we talk about all these challenges, typically these challenges arise for the labelers who have about large part numbers or a huge quantity of part numbers. One of the this one clients with whom Freer was interacting had about 4,500 different part numbers. So for a company of that company who has so huge part numbers, the submission management and the submission repository and the submission revision becomes a huge challenge there. Now, what do we mean by submission management here? If we just take that scenario here. So when we talk about submission management for a company which has a large part numbers, So the submissions are normally done via the ESG gateway. Now, the ESG gateway does not give you the response immediately. As soon as you submit, you don't get a response saying that this submission was successful or unsuccessful. So you need to wait. So normally what the tendency is, you keep on submitting the other submissions for the devices, and when you're at the 10th submission, probably you might get a response for the first submission which you have done. So now somebody has to keep track of all the acknowledgements which are coming for each of these submissions. In the ESG gateway submission, that is HL7 SPL, so typically we get 3 different acknowledgements, that is ACK1, ACK2 and ACK3. So one person has to dedicatedly keep track of how many submissions were successful, how many submissions were unsuccessful, and what were the errors that were generated by the ESG gateway. So maintaining this becomes a challenge. Now, if we talk about the repository, once we have successfully submitted all the part numbers to the GOODID database, now those successfully submitted XMLs also have to be kept in the repository. So if there is any revisions or any changes has to be made, the same thing can be utilized. And the similar challenge comes when you are working with the revisions for any of these submissions or devices. If there is a new market requirement that has come in and you want to change the device configuration or setting a little bit, then you need to do a revision of submission as well. The 4th point talks about device discontinuation. This might not be a huge challenge if there are only 1 or 2 device discontinuation as far as data maintenance is concerned, but it also poses as a challenge when you have to manage the discontinued device recall information. If that particular discontinued device has been recalled and you as a labeler needs to track it throughout the supply chain and then manage it, it again becomes a challenge. The 5th point talks about the PI data management, wherein, as I said earlier, that the PI data needs to be managed by the labeler. Now, how exactly you manage it, and this data again is auditable by the regulatory authorities. Now, and also this data has to be searchable and possibly available on the public domain for references as far as the expiry date or the recall information is concerned. And they also need to format the data in a ready-to-go format for any QA-related or audit-related queries. 6th point again reiterates the same point about the recalls to the PI data. Now, coming to the next slide here, in this section we will be talking about what are the next steps as a labeler you must need to do, and then what are the benefits of UDI and a couple of exceptions. So if I am a labeler and I have to comply with UDI ruling, then what all I need to be doing here? How do I plan my activities? So here we need to, as a labeler, I need to first understand the GOODID ruling or take assistance of somebody who knows the GOODID ruling and help myself understand what are its applicability. Then 2nd point talks about the planning of the work towards the compliance date. So probably just to get information, I would typically attend some workshops or webinars like this to equip myself with the latest what is happening in the ruling. Then typically I as a labeler probably need to identify a lead or a project manager who can take care of this entire compliancy. So that particular lead or the project manager can profile the entire devices which I produce or which I label with regards to the compliance dates for each of the devices. Like if I am manufacturing both class 3 and class 2, or probably in class 2 itself, implantable and non-implantable devices, we have different compliance dates. So Typically, as a project manager, I would profile them and identify them with relation to the compliance state. Then probably I would identify the sources of data from which I need to be collating, or probably take assistance like a company like Freyr for assisting the activity here to identify the internal sources and identify those 62 attributes where all they are located in my supply chain, be it the production department, be it the QA department, or the submissions department. So in many of the cases, the other submissions might be outsourced to different companies. So the information from those companies also need to be sought. So the next, this one logical step. The next logical step would be to identify or take a decision whether I as a labeler would directly go ahead and do the submission, or I would approach a third party, or should I be taking a look at electronic submission or the some technological solution to assist me in doing this. So all those decisions need to be made here. Probably I would reach out to some of the service providers and technology solution providers to assist us in identifying these things. The next logical step would be to request for immaterial of what approach I as a labeler would take. I would need a pre-production account to start with. So I would go ahead and request for a pre-production account, which is again you need to approach FDA. Then once you get your pre-production account activated, there are certain test criteria which you need to complete, or probably which I as a labeler need to complete before I get my production account activated. The FDA reviews all the test data and then verifies whether we have tested as per their given criteria. FDA has suggested certain test criteria to be done before we get into the production. So once we get the production account activated, then we can start submitting the DI. Again, as I was reiterating in our previous presentation, the entire activity takes time and we need to plan accordingly. So it cannot happen at the last moment. So again, I would suggest everybody to start planning the activity for good compliance at the earliest so that you can meet the compliance without having to hurry at the last moment. So let's talk about the benefits what this UDI is going to bring in. So as per the UDI ruling, and it can be generally observed here, that there are a lot of benefits to the implementation of UDI once all the devices are covered. So today, since the compliance is going stage by stage, we might not be able to visualize the entire benefits of this UDI. But once all the devices are covered under the UDI ruling, we might see a very good benefit coming out of it. We will be having a single authentic source where we can refer any devices, or we can look at any devices for its usage and where it is manufactured. A lot of details can be sought within a single unified database. We would be capable of identifying a particular instance of a device which malfunctioned. Probably if the labelers opt to go the electronic way, the technology way to publish the PI information, then definitely this is a possibility. Or possibility is a particular instance of a device which caused an adverse event. Now the UDI ruling, as I talked earlier, advises the health workers to record the UDI on the electronic health records as well. Now this is also going electronic here. So you have the connectivity of the entire device information going down up to the end usage to the patient's health record. Even if some device is implemented, a heart valve or a pacemaker is implanted in a particular patient, his health record would definitely state the UDI of that particular device, and you can refer it back. Recalls has been always a challenge to track in the supply chain, and that is one of the major benefits which UDI ruling would bring about. And lastly, a lot of other nations and other countries are, or other health authorities are looking at the UDI ruling very closely being implemented by FDA. So that I think already China is building up their framework. Probably next might be Canada. Then EMA might also follow the same steps there. So in a few years, we might see the UDI being global, wherein people sitting across nations or across continents will get the information of different devices which are being manufactured and used, and that can be imported to their nations where it is not being produced. So there are a lot of benefits and cross-continent or cross-country benefits which can be seen here as an end user, as a patient, and the benefits might be passed on. So of course, it also UDI also comes with a certain burden of cost, which the ruling during the discussion of ruling, coming out of the ruling and the final guidance, FDA talks about the cost impact to the labelers as well. So finally, let's talk about a couple of exceptions which have come in recently. And the last one, which was issued by FDA on November 19, 2014, that was for the single-use implantable devices, which had the deadline of whose deadline is being extended up to 2016. And there are two criteria based on which the FDA would provide the extension for compliance, UDI compliance. Those two parameters are stated here. That is, one is intended to be sterilized before use, and then second condition or criteria is single-use implants. So most of these kind of devices are supplied as non-sterile by the manufacturer typically, and those might need to be sterilized before usage. So with that, we come to the end of our discussion here and the three-part webinar series. So all the credits to the UDI help desk and the coded information provided by FDA, as well as IDMRF documents which we had to refer. Now, coming to the questions here, so I would pass on to Ranvijay for that.
Yeah, thank you, Prasanna, for presentation. We are now in the Q&A session, so I will start taking questions in the sequence that they've come in. The first question which came in is from Jay Markey, and his question is for blood glucose meter UDI labeling. The meter contains partial DIPI info. The meter has human readable and barcode for the serial number. The carton will have all DIPI info in human readable DI labeler number and PN PI with the serial number. So the question is, does the meter label itself require DI labeler number and PN as well as the SN information?
Okay, so let me just understand that question here. The meter contains partial DIPI info. The meter has human readable and barcode for the serial number. The carton will have all the DI and PI info in human readable. The question is, does the meter label itself require DI? The answer here is yes. The meter label should have the number or the serial number information here, both on the base package as well as the on the base package as well as the package DI as well. As we discussed earlier in our discussion, we talked about the base DI as well as the package DI, and typically a package DI would inherit all the parameters or the attributes from the base DI. So as per the ruling, you will need to have the serial number on both the instances of the packaging.
All right. So the next question is from Ravi, which is, how is data stored in Trayer software?
Okay, so this is a favorite question here for us, and it excites me to answer about our own product. Here. So, the data typically is stored. The data, when we input the data in our product, the data goes into a database, and then once the data is processed against all the business rules, business rules and validated, the output would be an XML file, which is ready to submit to the ESG gateway. So that is how the staging part is there, and then we also allow you to edit the data and then push it to the published state, and then from the published state it can go to the ESG gateway. So that is how the data management happens here in our Freyers Identity product.
Yeah, thanks, Asana. The following question to this is, so you were talking about the configuration and some configurable components. So the question over here is, for the configuration example, would this require only one UDI?
So we discussed about, yeah, correct, configuration system. The configuration system will have only one UDI, and that is based on the configurations mentioned in the catalog. So if there is again there is a little variation, and there can be some differences here depending on the kind of components that are packaged within that particular configuration device. Now, for example, if this is just a possibility, I'm just giving an example here. So the one possibility here is for that particular configuration device, supporting component may itself be a medical device. It might be a class 2 or a class 3 device. So that itself might be a medical device. Now, and also that device might be available commercially in the market. So in that scenario, if the same manufacturer is manufacturing both the configuration kit and that individual component as well, then both would probably need a different UDIs. So depending on scenario, so the UDI applicability might be decided. And this thing applies to the kits as well. As I was mentioning, in the kits, if there are instruments which are used for as we took the example of an orthopedic tray, wherein instruments were packaged with a medical device. So in that scenario, the instrument might be used multiple times, and that might require a direct marking. That might be falling in the scope of direct marking as well.
Right. We have one question which has come from Tom. Tom would like to know, is the PT code HXKT in your example a valid FDA device code?
Yes. Yeah. Let me just go to that slide. Yeah. Yeah. This is the slide, right? So HXKT is definitely a valid example, and we have taken it from the this one FDA's database itself. So both the GMDN code and the FDA PT code, both are the valid examples. So if you have the access to the interface, or if you have access to GMDN code, you can definitely validate these codes and confirm it to us.
Right. Thank you, Sunil. We have one question which has been asked by Kashmi. The question is regarding kits, which is, would an IVD kit be a part of the DI requirements that were mentioned in this talk?
Let me just understand this question. IVD kits be a part. IVD kit be a part of the DI requirements that were mentioned in this talk. Yeah, definitely yes. The IVD kits, that's the intravenous kit, I believe, is coming under the requirement of the DI, and we need to actually look into the specific device, and then on the whole, on the top of it, what it looks here is it is definitely applicable, and it might fall in the kit classification. So, or it might also be a configurable device. We need to look at it a little more closely, and then we can update you. But definitely there is a DI requirement for the IVD kit.
All right. Thanks, Prasanna. The other question is again from Ravi. So Ravi wants to ask, do you provide supporting validation documentation for the FRAIR software?
Yes, definitely we do provide all the validation documents for our product who is implementing, or if we are building a customized product for any of your needs or requirements, we follow all the CSV validation norms and Part 11 compliance norms, immaterial of the requirements. We also build in the default audit trails and required components which would support you in any of your audits. And all the ERES and GXP assessments would also be done. And definitely we would ensure that any of your internal quality audits or from any regulatory authority audits, it can easily get cleared.
Okay, we have a follow-up question. I think Jay has again asked the question and elaborated a bit more. So his question was, does the meter label require the DI info in human readable and barcode format?
First part of the question was, Ranvijay, help me understand this, was that this one meter label require a DI info in
human readable
and barcode format. That's the first part of the question, right? Yes, definitely, Jay, that is required. So that you, as per the UDI ruling, both HRI as well as AIDC techniques have to be followed in representing the UDI, and I believe we covered this in our previous discussions. So HRI is human readable interpretation and AIDC is auto identification techniques. So the auto identification techniques might you might use a barcode or a RFID tag or a QR code as convenient to you in your packaging or labeling thing. So you need to also have the label on this one. If the meter is individually packaged, so that package needs to have that UDI. When I say UDI, it means that DI plus PI, both together. Is there a following question there?
No, I think this is what.
Okay.
So with that, we we've just crossed the time for the webinar, and we'll stop the Q&A session over here. And so thank you so much, Prasanna, for taking the session. And I would like to thank all the delegates for taking their time out once again to join the final series of the UDI webinar. We will be making available all the slides as well as the recording and be sending a mail to all of you. So thanks once again, and thank you to the presenters.
Thank you.